7, printed in House Report 114-112. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, number 27.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 27, printed in House Report number 114-112, offered by Mr. Lamborn of Colorado.
Pursuant to House Resolution 260, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize myself for as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
My amendment is very simple. We should not implement a treaty, the New START treaty in this case, unless we believe the other party to the treaty is trustworthy and will uphold their end of the bargain. Now, if you don't trust Vladimir Putin, then you should vote for this amendment, and let me explain why. Right now, I don't believe the Russians are trustworthy. We know that they are already violating 3 major agreements: the INF Treaty, the CFE Treaty, and the Budapest Memorandum. Mr. Putin also continues to deny that Russian forces are engaged in combat in Ukraine. Because this amendment deals with treaties, let me expand on the details of these 3 treaties. First, in 1994, Russia, Ukraine, the United Kingdom, and the United States signed the Budapest Memorandum. This agreement included a commitment, respect, and I've got a copy right here, respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine, and a commitment to, quote, refrain from the force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine, unquote. Clearly, the recent invasions of Crimea and eastern Ukraine show that the Russian violation of the Budapest Memorandum. Second, in 1987, Reagan and Gorbachev signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF Treaty. Last year, the State Department released their annual compliance report, which states, and I've got a copy of it right here, quote, the United States has determined that the Russian Federation is in violation of its obligations under the INF Treaty, unquote. And third, in 2007, President Putin announced that he was suspending Russian participation in the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, or the CFE Treaty. This came after years of Russian violations of that treaty. And today, as we speak, the Russian military continues to occupy Ukrainian territory. Russian noncompliance with treaties cannot be disputed. My amendment would prevent the continued reduction of our nuclear weapons as required by the New START treaty unless the President can certify to Congress that the Russian Federation is occupying Ukrainian territory and also certifies that the Russians are abiding by their obligations under these 3 treaties. So if you think that the Russian Federation might not be trustworthy, then please support this amendment. We should not unilaterally disarm and blindly assume that the Russians will do their part. If the President can certify that the Russians are doing their part on these treaties, then the funding to implement the New START treaty will be released. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge adoption of this amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized. 5 minutes.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I stand second to no one in my dislike of Vladimir Putin. I think most everyone in this body hates Vladimir Putin. We despise his territorial aggression vis-a-vis the Ukraine, but this is not the right way to get back at Putin and Russia. The gentleman is a very senior and distinguished member of the committee. He's my friend. I don't recall the gentleman offering this amendment in the Armed Services Committee markup. Did the gentleman? May I ask why?
With the indulgence of the chairman, I thought that it was better timing to do it in this particular venue because we had other things going on in committee.
But we spent some 18 hours in committee. We considered hundreds of amendments, but the gentleman did not offer our committee, the Armed Services Committee, the opportunity to discuss this amendment.
Well, I didn't want it to be 18 and a half hours. So.
You know.
To the chair. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I would call this amendment by my friend from Colorado the boomerang amendment because it does not hit the intended target. Instead, it comes back and hits us. How does it do this? His amendment, as proposed, would amount to a unilateral U.S. treaty violation. would effectively blind the United States when it comes to looking at things like the number of Russian nuclear weapons on deployed intercontinental ballistic missiles, the number of deployed submarine-launched ballistic missiles, counting nuclear weapons on board or attached to deployed heavy bombers, and confirming weapons system conversions. These are the things that the New START treaty allows us to do with Russia. We need the continued ability to look at those systems. And by cutting off funding for these essential national security activities, the gentleman has hit the wrong target here. That's why this is the boomerang amendment. The gentleman pointed out that Russia is despicable in so many ways. They probably violated the INF Treaty and the CFE Treaty and the Budapest Treaty. But the gentleman is using the New START Treaty to get back at those violations. He's picked the wrong target. So I have the highest regard for the gentleman, but he proposed this last year. It was dropped in conference. Instead, it was substituted. We had an inquiry to the Pentagon to get their opinion on this, and they wrote us back and they said, the New START Treaty facilitates conditions to make the United States more secure, and its continued implementation remains in the national security interest of the nation. The Pentagon went on to say that the New START Treaty sustains effective deterrence and increases stability in the U.S.-Russian nuclear relationship at significantly lower levels of strategic delivery systems and warheads. And finally, the report said that the New START Treaty provides the United States a vital window into the Russian strategic nuclear arsenal. Let's not blind the United States. The gentleman had a chance in the committee to offer this. The gentleman offered this last year, and this is the response of the Secretary of Defense is strongly against the gentleman's amendment. The Joint Chiefs of Staff are strongly against the gentleman's amendment. And I would suggest that, Mr. Chairman, this amendment is not in the national security interests of the United States. For the gentleman to propose a unilateral violation of the solemn obligation of this country is a serious undertaking. We need more than 10 minutes to debate such a serious breach. This is a treaty, after all, only entered into in 2010, but it was entered into by a solid vote of the United States Senate, 71 to 26. I know many of us here wish that we were senators, but we're not. The Senate entered into that treaty solemnly. This would be a grave mistake to accept the gentleman's amendment. So I reserve the balance of my time and urge my colleagues to oppose the Lamborn amendment.
Gentleman reserves.
May I inquire of the chair how much time is remaining?
Gentleman from Colorado has 2 minutes remaining.
Okay, I'll take 15 seconds just to say
Gentleman is recognized.
it's not the right time to continue to unilaterally disarm under the terms that we would be facing in the face of these violations. And at this time, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield a minute and a half to the distinguished chairman of the Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, Representative Mike Rogers of Alabama.
And I want to thank the distinguished Vice Chairman of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee for this amendment and for yielding time. And the New START Treaty is the only bilateral arms control treaty I'm aware of that one party to reduce its nuclear weapons, and that's the United States. While the other party, Russia, increases its stockpile. And I have a prediction for you here today. If this truly is fully implemented by the United States prior to the 2018 deadline, we will see Russia cheating on the treaty immediately thereafter. Unless there's a U.S. president in office at the time Putin respects, he will cheat on this treaty as soon as he gets a chance. The Russians have no respect for the agreements they make. They have no respect for international law or sovereignty. They respect one thing and one thing alone, strength. I urge support of this prudent amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For purpose of gentleman, Tennessee, seek recognition.
How much time do I have remaining, Mr. Chairman?
1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect to my distinguished friends and colleagues, this should have been offered in committee where members are more conversant with these issues. This is not the right way to get back at Putin and Russia. For the United States to commit a unilateral treaty breach, and the gentleman has not even alleged that the Russians have violated the New START Treaty. This is one treaty that they actually seem to be adhering to. Now, we may question the wisdom of that treaty, but the Senate voted to confirm it, to ratify the treaty. It would be a grave mistake for this lower body to challenge that judgment. But the key point is this: why blind the United States to counting the number of Russian nuclear weapons. Why defund those activities? Don't we, how many ICBMs are in their silos? How many nuclear-armed submarines they have? Why don't we want to know what's really going on in Russia? So I think the gentleman is mistaken by proposing this as an appropriate way to get back at Putin. We need more insight into what the Russians are doing, not less. So this is a boomerang amendment. It attacks the wrong target. In fact, it comes back and hits us. I would urge the defeat of the Lamborn amendment.
Gentleman, time has expired. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I would just conclude by saying, Mr. Chairman, that we're being taken for suckers if we're expected to keep up one end of a bargain and we're dealing with a country that in so many cases is not keeping them. So that's why this amendment is proposed, not to get back at them, but to protect ourselves. I urge adoption of this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. All time has expired. The question